loaded me up. There's a committee.
Just excited.
Small novel.
I kind of am.
Well, yeah, but that's.
Part of me thinks we're just doing it, but mostly
You know, if you want to, if you have to, let's do that for when you say. You should still go to didn't go to any other Friday session. I'd like to call to order the Town of Strathmore public hearing for the public hearing of council pertaining to bylaw number 17-12, which is held November 1st at approximately 7:05 p.m. at the Strathmore Municipal Town Office. This public hearing is held pursuant to the Municipal Government Act RSA 2000, Chapter M-26, and amendments thereto, and I hereby declare the public hearing related to bylaw number 17-12 now open at 7:05 p.m. Legislative Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. Bylaw 1712 proposes to include the government services use as a permitted use under all land use districts, with the exception of residential districts where government services would be listed as a discretionary use. First reading of the bylaw was given on September 20th, 2017. The public hearing was advertised in the Strathmore Times on October 20th and October 27th, 2017. It was also made available on the Town of Strathmore website for review.
The following rules of conduct will be followed during the public hearing. Presentation should be brief and to the point and shall be limited to 3 minutes in length. The order of presentation shall be the administration, those in favor of the bylaw, those opposed to the bylaw, any other person deemed to be affected by the bylaw. Council may ask questions of the speakers after each presentation for clarification purposes, and there will be no debating the bylaw. To date, no letters of submission have been received. Does the administration have any comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. Administration will speak very briefly to this one, just for those members of council who are sort of coming on partway through. So this bylaw, bylaw 1712, Jen has kind of covered my first slide there, was initiated by town staff. So it's not an it's not a bylaw amendment being driven by an applicant looking to change a district. It was driven by town staff, partially as an intent to sort of add some flexibility to the way government services are sort of described in the land use bylaw, partially to sort of recognize our current practice where the town does have a number of government services being delivered out of commercial industrial zones land, and partially just to rectify some confusing language in the bylaw regarding utilities. The bylaw defined utility, or used some terms to define utilities, and then use them sort of inconsistently throughout the bylaw. So it's what we would describe as a housekeeping bylaw. So the first probably larger change is adding, the bylaw would add government services as an outright use in commercial and industrial zones. So this would allow government services, which are defined in the bylaw as a fairly standard, or fairly open-ended list of services delivered by the government to be used, to be deployed in any industrial commercial zones. So I use the example here of the FCSS offices in the downtown commercial zone, or the Rattray building in the industrial zone. So this kind of recognizes town practice already. It formalizes what we've been doing, and it makes it clear too going forward that if the town delivers government services out of these properties, we're sort of on side with the bylaw rather than ignoring it. So it is a good operational practice. As well, it does clarify the difference between utilities and utility buildings, so pipes, power lines, the like, and then utility buildings, so structures used to deliver a utility service. So staff are recommending, of course, being a sort of staff-presented bylaw that council gives second and third reading later in the meeting. The bylaw is good practice in that it matches sort of what the town is doing already and clarifies some inconsistencies and inconsistent wording in the bylaw. That concludes staff's prepared remarks. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is there anyone present who supports the bylaw who wishes to speak? Is there anyone present who opposes the bylaw and wishes to speak? Is there anyone present deemed to be affected by the bylaw who wishes to speak? Do the councillors have any further questions? Councillor Peterson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question as I was going through this prior to our meeting. I guess I was thinking about in all the instances that this could possibly impact. So I was visioning, large economic migration for some reason to a specific area. And especially when I looked at the conclusion in the document talking about giving greater flexibility to currently inaccessible districts noted on page 404. And so I was thinking about if we were talking about urban agriculture and intentional communities or discretionary use of any kind, then how would this bylaw possibly impact any of those things? Or would there be impediments? Would it change the way we currently do business today relative to government services?
Your Worship, in response to Councillor Peterson's question, truth be told, it probably won't change practice a lot. The town has opted to deliver services out of commercial industrial zones, and realistically, provincial or federal services can be delivered anywhere. They have the option of ignoring town bylaws. So realistically, in terms of actual boots to the ground type practice, it probably doesn't change a lot. It more so is intended to recognize current town practice and really make it clear, especially to our engineering services, that they can deliver services out of commercial and industrial zones.
If I might, Your Worship. So then it in no way changes or impacts negotiation for future land use or impacts any kind of optimal use for changes in community specific to, say, economic migration or amenity migration. I'm trying, as I read this, I saw, I guess, possibilities and potentials, and I guess that's what I'm thinking about. I have no objection to it. I recognize that it's largely editorial, but sometimes editorial changes can have long-lasting impacts.
Your Worship, with regards to that, the possibility could be if the town were really negotiating with another level of government for land and were sort of holding back redesignating the property in exchange for amenities, in exchange for some sort of contribution from that level of government, it could be an issue. It could be weakening the town's hand. That being said, as I sort of alluded to earlier, at the end of the day, if a senior level of government wants to use a parcel of land, for example, the RCMP, for example, would have the option of putting it on a town parcel regardless of the zoning. So it's one where it could be perceived in weakening the town's hand, but land use bylaws probably aren't the tool the town would be using to negotiate with these levels of government anyways.
So in relation to potential for growth management boards and having, and of course that's what I'm most considering into the future, and looking at the potential thoughts of our neighbors in terms of impact into the future. I guess that's my big concern, is that it in no way impedes us into the future. And maybe what you're saying is, it won't matter. Which is really unfortunate.
Yeah. Did you want to respond to that? That last
Your
part?
Worship, I think Councillor Pearson has sort of, hit upon it, is it simply may not matter with senior levels of government and in terms of dealing with sort of other municipalities. Again, I would expect that would come out of sort of negotiations rather than council using the land use bylaw as a tool to control these. It's just too blunt a tool to really be useful that way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do any other councillors have any further questions? Are there any further, oh, you do. So Councillor Montgomery, sorry.
I have some questions about like the utility side of it. So I guess my first one is it common to include public transportation as a utility?
Your Worship, with regards to that, public transportation typically would be where we're looking to do, sort of drop-off type bus drop-offs, those sorts of things. It probably doesn't really matter either way there. Those typically are done within road right-of-ways. But I think staff included that there just as to try to cover off all possible utilities that we may see on a property where, for example, a bus stop might be placed, on a mall parking lot or something, for example.
Okay. And my second question is, would utility buildings be discretionary or permitted?
Your Worship, that sort of depends on the zone, or sorry,
Okay.
the land use district. I do keep tripping over myself with that term. So some of the land use districts, they'd be discretionary uses, some they're permitted.
So some utilities would be limited by the type of utility to certain districts then?
Your Worship, some of the utility buildings would be discretionary buildings in certain zones. So for example, residential zones, there would be that extra added level of rigor associated with it being a discretionary zone and the potential for appeal.
But the utilities themselves, not utility buildings, would those be discretionary versus permitted?
Your Worship, my apologies to Councillor Montgomery, I misinterpreted the question. No, utilities would be permitted.
Okay.
The town isn't really in a position where we'd be regulating, for example, where power lines would go through the land use bylaw.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Are there any other questions? Then I hereby declare this public hearing for bylaw number 17-12 closed at 7:15 PM and will accept a motion to adjourn.
So move.
You've all heard the motion. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Thank you. Which brings us to the regular meeting of Council, November 1st, 2017. And the first item is confirmation of agenda. Are there any items, Councillor Sobel?
I have nothing, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Bauer?
I have nothing, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Montgomery?
None, Your Worship.
Councillor Cox?
Nothing, Your Worship.
Councillor Peterson?
Your Worship, I requested a letter be brought forward, and I'm wondering if you could add that to the agenda as an emergent item as it's related to a timely grant.
Okay, and I'll just seek some direction from our legislative services. Where would you fit that the best?
Your Worship, under Section 11, urgent business.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank
And
you, Your
thank
Worship.
you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Corbeil?
Nothing, Your Worship.
Thank you. Item 3, presentations and recognitions. Ms. Sawatsky?
Your Worship, we need to pass a motion to adopt the agenda.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
I would move adoption of the agenda, Your Worship.
You've all heard the motion. All in favor? Which now brings us to item 3, presentations, recognitions. Nothing. And I believe we have no delegations tonight. So that brings us to item 5.1, minutes, confirmation of minutes, the minutes of the October 4th, 2017 regular council meeting.
I'll move those minutes, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. You've heard the motion. All in favor? Now we move to item 5.2, minutes of the October 25th, 2017 organizational council meeting. Councillor Cox.
I'll move that motion for you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. You've heard the motion. All in favor? And I believe we have no tabled items. So that moves us to number 7, item 7, items from administration, and 7.1, development permit policy number 6608. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. No matter how many times I do this, I still have trouble with the PowerPoint. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. This will be the brief staff presentation on development permit process policy 6608. This is a policy that really is exciting for me in particular, and I think a very good step for the development or infrastructure and development services in Strathmore. It begins to, or sort of the next step in accomplishing a lot of the concerns that were raised during the development services review earlier this year. So I'll take council through it as briefly as I can make it before I get too excited. So the purpose of this report is to consider policy 6608, a policy guiding the processing of development permits in the town of Strathmore. It's part of that larger project that we alluded to during the organizational meeting, this drive to make the infrastructure and development services, and particularly the development services end of the department, to be as transparent, open, and fair as possible, to really begin to document the processes, to lay the processes and sort of the steps staff take out to council, out to the public, out to developers and builders. So this is earlier, sort of towards the end of the previous council's mandate, council adopted a similar set of policies regarding subdivision processing and regarding sort of the creation and administration of development agreements, subdivision agreements, and endeavors to assist. So this is sort of that next step in that larger project, which is considering the development permit process. We'll use the arrows. So at this time in the town of Strathmore, Strathmore doesn't have a formal documented development permit process. It's sort of been a process, or a case of older staff teach newer staff how it's done, and that process is passed down through generations of staff. But there's no sort of formal documentation or process that's been adopted by council or even consistently recognized by staff. So the proposed policy here is important from 2 points of view. One is both with that larger drive towards professionalization and transparency, but as well the new amendments to the Municipal Government Act that council will be hearing of require that municipalities publicize all of their processes, all of their policies, and really and specifically publish them on websites. So this is, in addition to being, again, what we'll say is good planning practice, it's also now process that's being required by the Municipal Government Act and the province of Alberta, that we really, as a municipality, put these online, show the public what steps we're taking, and then hew to it, I suppose. As well, and anyone who's sort of taken an organization through various process management improvements or things like ISO 9000, quality management processes, that sort of thing, the very first step is always document your processes. So this is, again, moving generally in that direction. So the processes, and we won't go through them ad nauseum here, but they really don't differ a lot from the standard town of Strathmore practices in terms of how files are handled, how they move about the system. The real key here is just, one, by publishing them, we're going to get that consistency among staff. Talking to staff, they all sort of diverted somewhat from one from the other in terms of how things were processed. So this will pull everyone back to that same sort of list of steps. Gets that consistency as well as new staff come in, as old staff drop off. That developers know they will receive the same service, the same standard, and the same processes as everyone else. And really emphasizing, and again, this comes out of that development services review earlier in the year, that everyone will know they are being treated the same because the town can show how everyone will be treated. Part of the changes here as well are a real drive towards transparency. So right now the town advertises sort of discretionary use permits, but doesn't advertise all permits. So part of this proposal or this policy would have the town advertising every permit issued would go in the paper. So this is similar to what Calgary or Medicine Hat do, where everything we issue, we are completely transparent, put it in the paper. Suspect no one will really read them, but nonetheless, it is just that transparency. Right now, our bylaw leaves that to the discretion of the development officer. The preference here is to have a formal policy saying everything goes in the paper. That way, there's no question, there's no discretion, just everyone's treated the same. As well, permits are being tracked on the website, so if you have put in a permit with the town of Strathmore, you can go online and check out sort of where it is in the process. So anyone can. It would be open to everyone, or it is open to everyone. But again, opening up that transparency a bit more. Doing earlier notification of discretionary use permits to give people a chance to speak before the decision is made, as well as notifying after the decision is made. So again, going that extra mile in terms of communication with the public, especially in this instance, affected public. So that's all part of that drive towards transparency, openness. The best way you show you have nothing to hide and that you're treating everyone the same is just complete openness with the process. So that's really what this policy aims to do. Finally, just tying it back to council's strategic vision. So some of the things that came out of that council strategic plan, beginning of 2017 development services review, were council identified outdated policies and procedures and inconsistent regulations as some of the issues, and really expressed that goal to see staff and administration be consistent, transparent, and predictable in their processes and in their decision making. So while this is still guidance from an older council, staff are still referring to these until new documents come out from this group. So overall, of course, staff are recommending that council adopt policy 6608. That concludes staff's prepared remarks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Peterson?
No, Councillor Sobel's ahead of me.
Oh. No, I'm not. Oh, were you doing the fake thing? Nice. Councillor Peterson?
Thank you, Your Worship. So if I could just draw your attention to the bottom of page 2, the top of page 3. When I read that, sorry, now I have to go back myself, where it says, the change does not reduce any council powers. Council still has the power to direct staff, etc. And then finally it says, the policy amendments shift the burden of approving the template agreements from the council to the CAO. It struck me that this is the argument that my husband uses when he wants to take over all the finances in our house and assume a greater portion of the power. And so I think that it would lend itself, that this whole process would lend itself a little bit better to balance if there was some in between. I can honestly say that I'm not entirely comfortable with this shift, because this becomes a major shift to what we had in the past. And so that's one of my concerns. There's very much about this that I like. I like the certainty that it gives to developers, primarily. The other thing that concerns me, the only other issue that I have, is in our visioning exercise, or at least mine, I can't speak for council specifically, I don't always think that reducing risk, although it's desirable, I don't always think that reducing risk is conducive to innovative development. One of the things that I see other communities doing very, very successfully is allowing for greater negotiation within the development process. And I guess having it in the purview of the CAO would possibly lend itself more to that. But I guess I still have concern that this isn't built into this policy, that capacity for negotiation. And I also think that there maybe needs to be a greater balance with regards to approving templates. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Any comments to that?
Your Worship, and this will be a somewhat embarrassing admission on the part of staff. A lot of that language, specifically everything in that second paragraph between under policy 6608, was actually left in the report from a previous report, and made it through the old proofreading process there. That aspect was from sort of that previous discussion about development permit and subdivision agreement templates. So this process doesn't speak to that any. It's that was simply a rather embarrassing.
So if I could interject just on Councillor Peterson's questioning. So is this just strictly dealing with the template and how it's created and how it's presented?
Your Worship, with regards to that, no, the policy actually doesn't speak to templates at all. That was a matter that we discussed earlier. It was, it was more, this was more sort of a typo and aspect of the report that was left in. With regard to Councillor Peterson's comments regarding risk, staff are certainly agree that risk can't be removed from the development process. What we're looking to do, though, is remove from the perception of risk that staff will change the rules of the game halfway through the game. Developers, of course, take on risk, market risk, construction risk, all that, even political risks with regard to council approval. The form of risk that was really raised during that development services review and what came up again and again was this concern that goalposts were shifting partway through processes. And that's the sort of risk that staff really want to remove by publicizing our processes is if a developer can go into the process eyes wide open, knowing I will have to do this, 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 and this to satisfy staff, then at least they can control those risks and they don't run the risk of staff, at step 6, saying, and we need these 2 extra goodies here. So that's the sort of risk that staff can control for, or that administration can control for.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sobel.
Thank you, Your Worship. By the way, just for interest's sake, I'm kind of excited about this too. We don't usually get excited about planning stuff, but because I think it's really important. But just to clarify, I just want to, because I didn't see the shift of power to the CAO from council in the policy, only in the precursor, and so we're clear on the fact that this paragraph on template changes should not have been in this report. That's as simple as it is. Thank you. The question I have, and it was related to what you were just talking about the moving goalposts, and I'm always concerned about that because some of these applications and these procedures take a long time. So, so my original question was going to be, after the approval of the permit and prior to completion of the work, and there's a change in policy, a change in the procedure, is that applicant grandfathered?
Your Worship, with regard to the question of grandfathering, the provincial government extends those protections through the Municipal Government Act. So in those instances there, even if Strathmore, once the permit is approved, even if policies changed, the provincial protections would be extended to the developer there.
Okay, great, thank you. And are we going to be, do you anticipate with the new procedure that's in place, do you anticipate us being proactive in incompleted development permit applications in regards to changes that may be considered in regard and discussing them with applicants?
Your Worship, one of the sort of policy or internal shifts that staff have done is really ensuring and requiring that development be submitted with complete applications.
Okay.
And again, this is me getting excited. One of the changes, and I think we'll maybe in a few weeks talk to council about all of the changes Development Services has made, even sort of the behind the scenes things that council will see, is producing proper checklists for all of our development permit and building permit applications. If staff is expecting to get complete development permit applications, it behooves us to tell everyone what that is up front.
Right.
So one of the things we've rolled out both on the website and at the front counter is proper checklists that applicants can, read through, check the boxes, staff counter check the boxes, and everyone agrees there that the application's complete and it's submitted.
Positive action. Thank you very much.
Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have a two-part question, and that would be, what are the external agencies that would review the development permit application? And is 14 days enough time for those groups to process those things?
Your Worship, so typically the external groups that go through it are most often the Ministry of Transportation. So the provincial ministry with anything close to the highway. As well, some of the sort of rare cases staff have referred to, for example, the WID, the county if it's near county lines, and then in internal groups as well. Oddly enough, it is most often the internal staff referrals that take the longest. We've had really timely responses from the external referral groups.
Through the chair, is there like a mechanism to extend that 14 days? Like if there was like some sort of environmental assessment that needs to be done? Or if it was just like a more complicated development application?
Your Worship, with regards to that, absolutely. If an external body were to get back to us and say, Strathmore, we've seen this referral, we need a few more days to produce a more comprehensive response. So long as they get back to staff and sort of say, we see it, it's just going to take that extra amount of time. I'm just going to step back here, probably for the best. Then we can extend that deadline. We don't want to sort of push these referral groups out, but it's important to get timely responses.
Sorry, through the chair, one more question. So there wouldn't be any sort of like hard obligation on the town's part to the developer applicant for that 14 days? Like there is something where you could say, yeah, we need another few days.
Your Worship, I'll just grab this here. So the 14 days here, I'll just come back here. Want to make sure that we have extended that. So with regards to that sort of, the way the wording is, and we will ensure council's comfortable with this, if not staff can amend it, is if no response is received within the 14 days, it will be deemed as no objections. However, if there's sort of a request for a timeline extension, I think it would be reasonable, even within the parameters of this, to grant that, provided it doesn't start to extend to that 40 days where the town is required to give an answer. If a government referral body were, for example, to ask for a 2-month comment period, that would put the town in the difficult position where the applicant could deem the application refused because he wouldn't been hitting that 40-day mark. And in a case like that, staff would sort of work with the applicant on that and sort of, work them through that process rather than sort of allow it to expire without communicating. We will, Your Worship, probably see some situations even within the first year of this council's term where there are some really complicated applications come in. And we'll speak to developers early and probably submit referrals to provincial ministries before even the formal application is in, to give them that extra lead time for responses.
Okay,
Some
thank you.
in particular.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery and Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to just quickly draw your attention to page 19, 4.2. You indicated just before, just seeking clarification, that that the CAO was, that there were no templates, but it does note in 4.2 that there's a template, so I'm just assuming that at that point you're talking about the permit itself?
Your worship, with regards to that, that's sort of in reference to policy 6607, which is,
Which I just, yeah,
yeah, which is that development agreement and subdivision agreement template. So in this instance here, the intent of that clause 4.2 is that policy 6607 gives that subdivision and development agreement template power to the CAO. Policy 4.2, or clause 4.2 in this policy then sort of forces staff to be using those templates authorized by 6607 for these agreements. We couldn't just, staff couldn't just sort of come up with their own on the fly there. It forces staff to use the approved ones that would have come out of 6607.
thank you. And so my final question through the chair is that in this document, then council maintains the same level of responsibility that they had prior?
Your worship, with regards to 6608, it absolutely is. This document is intended to deal with how staff are processing permits.
Exactly.
So that those don't typically come before council unless staff deem it really an exceptional case. So this one here really doesn't change anyone. That was policy 6607 that dealt with that a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. So you've heard everything. I guess at this point, I'd be looking for a motion concerning the recommendation. Councillor Montgomery?
Sorry, I just gotta get to the page here. I move that council accept for information the report from administration detailing the development permit process policies. And further, that council adopt development permit process policy number 6608.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. You've heard the motion. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Worship, I'm just wondering if we should amend that first motion, maybe split them and amend that first motion to
sorry.
remove the portion that pertains to template changes in that report.
Administration, Mr. Thackeray.
Yes, if I may, through the chair, it's entirely at council's discretion to simply receive the report for information. It doesn't bind council to a position or decision. And certainly, council, if you wish to redact that part of the report, I would recommend a separate motion redacting that part of the report as being a bit of a hiccup. And then council could adopt the report in its entirety with that redaction.
Okay, so Councillor Montgomery, would you be then willing to adjust your motion so that it just deals with the first part?
Yes, I would, your worship. I move that council accept for information the report from administration detailing the development permit process policies.
Redacting.
And do we have to specify the section that we're redacting?
The one on template
The
changes.
part on template changes? Does that make sense, Ms. Sawatsky?
Okay, and I would also move that we redact the aforementioned part of the policy.
So are we good, Ms. Sawatsky? Are you okay with that? You're with us? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Sobel, for stepping in, and Councillor Montgomery. So we've heard the motion concerning the first part, including the redaction. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. So then, just to make sure then, are we still moving on with the policy itself? Okay, so then I'm looking for a second motion.
I would move that council adopt development permit process policy number 6608.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. You've all heard that motion? All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you, worship, and I will apologize. as the proofreader on this, I apologize to council. I should have caught that and cleaned that up, so no worries. My apologies.
Thank you. And that brings us to item 7.2, the Cooperative Stormwater Management Initiative, CSMI Agreement.
Your Worship, Infrastructure and Development Services is pleased to bring forward for information the Community Stormwater Management Initiative Agreement. The background of this, the stormwater management is an ever-increasing issue for communities in southern Alberta. The town of Strathmore currently has a discharge agreement with the Western Irrigation District for the original pre-annexation lands of the town. Since we annexed the land in recent annexation, those lands are not covered by this agreement. Recognizing that this stormwater drainage is a shared issue between the Collaborative Stormwater Management Initiative began in 2012 with the partners, the Western Irrigation, and 5 other municipalities. This partnership that was to develop a practical way of dealing with our stormwater in these new annexation areas, along with everyone else's stormwater. On June 4th, 2015, the partnership established the government principles, and based on those principles, a draft agreement has been created, circulated and edited by all parties, municipalities throughout the summer. The agreement was given to the town, giving the town the ability to discharge stormwater lands annexed since the last discharge agreement with the WID, and then continues to add lands that are developed. Based on the CMSI build-out, town will need to invest approximately $6 million over 20 to 25 years based on development growth. Funding for this will consist mainly of off-site levies contributed by grant funding by upper levels of municipalities or upper level of government. And that is just the preliminary estimate from the original draft agreement. The agreement has been presented and approved by the City of Chestermere, Wheatland County, Rocky View County. The WID Board will be presenting this agreement on November 1st, and administration will bring forth the agreement to the Strathmore Town Council on November the 15th, 2017 for a resolution. The City of Calgary will review this in January of 2018. Working with the CMSI will give the town the ability to offer stormwater management drainage options to make it easier for our developers outside. Right now, they have to evaporate. They're not allowed to discharge into the works of the WID. I'm bringing forward this for information because it's a large document and a lot of information, and I didn't feel that 1 week of time was sufficient for council to have a sufficient understanding of it. So brought forth in this information is the final draft of the agreement, the CMSI governance and evaluation results and recommendations, and the Denton speaking notes for your review. I'm open if we need to. If you have specific questions, I can put a motion for the committee of the whole so that I can actually bring those forward to when you bring it forward for motion. I'm open for all types of getting your feedback. It's really important for me to make sure that we're making the right decision here. Questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions from councilors? Councilor Sobel?
Just to clarify, Mark, are you willing to accept some questions today, or do you want them going to the committee of the whole?
Either way, if you have questions already, because
They're fairly
I want
general.
everyone to.
Yeah, mine are fairly general, and once again, if you need time to respond, I don't have an issue with this. We have time on this one. First of all, I'm glad we're moving ahead on this. It's a major issue. So this project is 20 to 25 years, as you've said. So at what point do you anticipate that our developers are going to be able to start using stormwater procedures rather than evaporation? Do you have any guess on that?
1 year from the signing of this agreement, we have to have the other agreements in place. And then in those other agreements is all that process of when exactly
Okay.
we can, and how much we can, so that will, within a year, we will have firm knowledge of that exact question.
Got you. And my other question was in regards to page 2 of 2, page 26 of our agenda, is in regards to funds for the initiative will consist mainly of offsite levy collection and grant funding. And I've read the report, and I understand the desire on our government to look at a regional stormwater plan, which is very encouraging in this regard. Is that basically where you're looking at, or where the committee is looking at in regards to grant funding?
Yeah, there is a grant. I'm not specific on the exact amount, but it is in that couple $1 million that we have if we can get this agreement signed. So and I'll bring forward those details on the next council, but if we get this, that's why the urgency of getting this in and making sure that we get it through. That's why all the other committees have already approved it.
Sure.
Right, and that grant will pay for a lot of the preliminary studies that we need.
Sure. And of course, whatever grant funding we get will reduce the amount that's been suggested today, the $6 million.
Right. Well, the $6 million is the original estimate on the infrastructure that needs to be built, and that's part of those agreements to find out what infrastructure we really need and when. Right.
Okay.
So that will really affect the prices of those.
Okay. And my last question is in regards to, it's on page 33 under voting structure. And it's a very innocent question, but in regards to appointing, each member appointing one director to the board of directors, do you have some ideas to what kind of an individual, like, is that going to be a member of our municipality, or is it going to be a person at large, or are you aware?
I just got that email today, actually about 4 o'clock. So I was going to discuss that with James here.
You know, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. Eventually, we'll find out, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, no, sorry. We don't have an answer for that one.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. Councillor Cox?
Thank you, through your worship. I just have a really simple question. It says that the agreement was presented to the City of Chestermere, Wheatland County, and Rocky View and approved. Is that the actual agreement? In its entirety? No amendments, no nothing, just like it is here?
That is correct. One of the things that this agreement, when you get into the details of it, it basically has a caveat in there that we have a couple other agreements that we have to enter into it, and if we don't enter into those agreements, this agreement dies. But if we enter into this agreement, it opens up that grant funding. So if we can't come to within a year, but I guess at the end of the day, the way the lawyers explained to me is this obligates the town to enter into negotiation for a year. That's what the only thing, it doesn't obligate us to actually enter into the $6 million or any of those things. All it enters is that we must enter into the agreement and make a decision within that year, unless all parties agree to extend it, but basically within the year to enter into the other, and if not, this dies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I think it's Councillor Peterson and then Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you, Your Worship. In early 2017, I attended a meeting, you might have been there in some capacity, at the Radisson on CSMI.
Okay.
And one of the issues that repeatedly came up among the member groups was were the agreements or potential to include as partners First Nations. And I'm wondering if, and I don't need an answer today, that can come at a future period, but I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have kind of a series of questions, and if you can't answer them now, that's fine. So one just has to do with, I guess, expected cost. Any idea on what we would be seeing as a cost?
For next
Well-
year or for the entire?
Well,
program?
so like, cause like, I guess like another question would be, so, we're paying for just developed portions of land, or is it like by volume of water that we put into the system?
So that the actual costs, there's some preliminary reports that have been done, and that's where we've generated some offsite levies based on those preliminary, just so we have a reserve already built, because we can only charge at one time our offsite levies. So that has been done. On the actual cost on the development per area, that's detail in the actual agreements, but it would be for developed lands, but it's based on a percentage. So if we all of a sudden take out a whole swath of land, or Chestermere does, or Rocky View says, they're taking out Conridge, for example, because the Growth Management Board said, no, you can't develop that, then they'll take that out and their percentage will be readjusted as the overall cost of the system. So that's where some of this will go and fro, and that's part of that. You'll see some of the stuff in there about Conridge. They have a specific issue because they don't know if the Growth Management Board takes that all out, then there's a huge portion of their stormwater needs are removed.
Okay. And then, like, are we looking at, and, like, I guess, so it'd be page 8 of the actual document, section 4 has to do with, the ability to sell the stormwater. Are we looking into what we can do about selling some of our stormwater? Or does that just pertain to when it's out in the regional infrastructure?
Right, there was, I'll have to get the exact details on there, but I do know there's a lot of negotiation and discussion about the stormwater when it comes out. If it's CMSI and it goes to WID system, can WID then take that and utilize that and sell that water again, or is it our water? There was a bunch of details around that, and I'm not exactly clear on your specific answer to your question, but I'll investigate that.
Oh, yeah, I think it'd be worth looking into, like, what we can recover cost-wise. And then as well, like, so page 9 of the document, section 7, what is the benefit of borrowing money through the cooperative versus the WID?
I'm not aware of that issue. I'll have to get the
Okay.
information on that.
And then the other one would be, does Strathmore have kind of quote-unquote conditions precedent? I noticed the other municipalities do.
We didn't put that in because we actually put it as a condition of us even bringing this forward to council, that we would bring forth prior to bringing this agreement on the 15th. We will be bringing forth a 10-year agreement with the WID to renew our existing agreement. And if we didn't get that, we would not bring forward this on the 15th of November and missing the schedule. So we have that agreement. It will be brought forward on the 15th, which we had a 10-year agreement. We got it renewed for 1 year, and we've now got a draft that we'll be bringing forth on the 15th. That will be for another 10-year agreement. So we kind of did it a different way because just to keep it simple.
Okay. Okay, and like, I guess, like, so the other question I had to do with water usage, which is section 6.3 on page 21. And it just has to do with, I guess, yeah, our ability to use our own stormwater. So this wouldn't really pertain to anything we collected within the town, and are we looking at diverting some of the water within town to in-town usage, rather than just putting it all into the regional infrastructure?
That is correct. The original reports talked about a volume control, and as such, as part of volume control, that would be part of that reuse in order to minimize how much water we can actually discharge our system. So this agreement will take place at certain points of transfer. So we'll define the service berry transfer at one point, and at that point, it's CMSI responsibility. Anything above that point is ours, and that's where they would monitor the volume, and the control, and the quality, and we do all our responsibility upstream. And same with the Eagle Lake one. So,
Okay, thank you.
And if there's no other questions, I just had one general one, and I see that it's being presented to the WID board today. Has that happened already, or is that happening tonight, even as we speak?
I think it's happening tonight. That's one of the reasons I wanted to get this forward, just so that they know we're bringing it forward to you guys.
So is there a chance or a risk that this will have to go back and you'll have to rework the agreement with the other areas like Rocky View, City of Chestermere, or?
Highly unlikely, based
Okay.
on the conversations with with the lawyers and the granting, and how, in order to be qualified for the grant, if they went and did that and we had to go back to all the other councils,
Yeah.
I don't think we'd make the timeline for the grant money, so that would put all that money at risk.
Okay. Thank you. So if I can just get a clarification from Ms. Sawatsky, are we looking for a motion to accept as information then?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so council, then, what I'll be looking at is for a motion for us to accept this as information presented. Councillor Bauer.
I move to accept this information for the report for information for council.
Okay, thank you. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Mark. All right, council and audience, that brings us to 7.3, Family Violence Prevention Month in Alberta.
Your worship. Council's received a request from Alberta Community and Social Services to proclaim Violence Prevention Month in Alberta. This year's theme is Reach Out, Speak Out, It Takes Us All, and administration is recommending the proclamation.
Thank you, Ms. Sawatsky. So on page 87 of your handouts, we're looking for a motion. Councillor Montgomery.
I move that council proclaim November as Family Violence Prevention Month in Strathmore.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And the motion is passed. Thank you. Item 7.4, council member committee appointments. Ms. Sawatsky.
Yes, Your Worship. We've postponed this for a week. Typically, council makes appointments at their organizational meeting, but we gave council some time to get some information on the committees before we made the appointments. There are a number of committees. I believe council has received the list from administration earlier this week in regards to times, et cetera, and now we need to make the appointments.
Thank you. If I could just ask a question for clarification from Ms. Sawatsky. If you can scroll up a bit, I think I'm watching, scroll down, sorry. The Sports Complex Planning Committee, is that the one that we've been dealing with the field house as far as planning it as well as sponsorship?
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct.
So is that a committee on our list then that should be struck as far as that goes? Or do we just need new members to be on that committee in case there are?
Your Worship, I'm not too sure if that committee's business is complete.
Okay.
If it is not complete, then council does need to
But this
appoint
wouldn't
two members.
Thank you. This wouldn't necessarily be the sponsorship one then, that's a separate one? So the only member we're missing on this one would be the former councillor who's not with us now.
Your Worship, that is the same committee. It's the
Okay.
sponsorship committee
So-
for the sports.
So that's a two-person committee, and we're missing the previous person who's not with council, and then I was on that committee, so.
Correct.
Are we looking for two
For
replacements
two
then?
members, yes.
Okay, thank you. And the only other thing I was going to mention was you needed two people for Wademsa. Did we get that second person? Because Councillor Corbeil mentioned earlier that she would, just before we came, she was interested in that one as well. Okay, thank you. So is there any discussion from councillors concerning the committees, the names put on?
Your Worship, also council does need to decide on the Downtown Design Review Committee. There are a number of councillors who put their name forward, but there's only 2 seats available for that committee.
Yes, I think there were 3 people interested. Councillor Montgomery sent me an email earlier that he would be willing to step down from that one and assume something else.
Which one was that for?
That was you, Bob?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Can we just go up to the top and start at the
Sure. Does that sound like it'll work, Ms. Sawatsky? Or do you want to go committee by committee? We've got everything filled, is that correct, except for the DDRC now?
Perhaps, Your Worship, for transparency, we should go committee by committee.
Okay. So would you like?
Do you want-
me-
sure.
I would, you might as well do it because you've been generating the list, but that would be great if you could report.
Sure. So Downtown Design Review Committee, we need two names, two counselors appointed to that committee, and I don't, I'm not clear on who that is this time.
Councillor Cox, I think you were first. Did you want to speak to that?
I was actually before that, but
Oh,
I did say that I would sit on that, but I believe somebody else was ahead of me, so.
I think the names would just be suggestions that all could be considered or could be interested in it. I don't know if
My name up for that committee.
Okay, so we have 3 people then looking for the 2 spots?
Who's the third?
I thought there was a third this afternoon, but I could be mistaken.
Your Worship, I can clarify. So I have on our list Councillor Montgomery, Councillor Cox, and Councillor Bauer interested in DDRC.
Right, that's what I thought, okay.
I can pull my name. Your Worship.
And these are 1-year appointments too, are they not? So there's always a chance you can revisit this easily a year from now?
That is correct.
Okay. So Councillor Bauer, are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, so then our 2 people on the Downtown Design Committee then would be Councillor Montgomery and Councillor Cox, if they're still willing to have their names forward? Oh, we're back.
Okay, next committee, Your Worship,
thank you.
was the Financial Audit Committee, and we had Councillor Montgomery and Councillor Corbeil.
Okay, thank you.
Next committee was Seniors Advisory Committee. We have Councillor Cox.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peterson.
I know that Councillor Cox had said that there might be some difficulty when you're working.
So I actually need to go back a step because it's the Tuesday one. So it's the Downtown Design Review one that I'll have a conflict at times. So if Councillor Bauer then I would prefer not to be on that one. But I also noted down further that Councillor Corbeil has quite a few on her plate. And I wasn't aware that the sports complex was part of the sponsorship, and I would actually really like to be a part of that sponsorship planning committee.
Okay, we're still going to come to that sports complex planning one, still to come?
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. So back to the DDRC, that, we're fine with that now, is that correct? Oh, that's the one that you need to have, you need to be removed from that one. Okay, so we have, according to this, I had her down as one of the names, Montgomery, Cox, and Bauer, and then Councillor Bauer stepped off. Is that correct? So,
Your Worship, at this point in time, I have Councillor Montgomery and Councillor Bauer.
yes, that's good. Thank you. Okay, so Seniors Advisory then is okay because Councillor
Yes.
Cox doesn't have a time commitment problem with that.
Yes. So for Sustainability, I have Councillor Montgomery and Councillor Sobel.
Okay, thank you.
For Traffic Advisory, I have Councillor Sobel.
Thank you.
For Tourism Development, I have Councillor Peterson.
Okay, thank you.
For the Disaster Aid Committee, I have Councillor Corbeil and Councillor Bauer.
Okay, thank you. And that's one that would meet on a fairly irregular basis. It's a as need.
Your Worship, a terms of reference for that committee will be coming forward, an amended terms of reference. Administration is doing some research on that committee.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to add that just in terms of, not to scare off Councillor Corbeil or anyone that, it's not something that is going to be really onerous as far as meeting.
Your worship, I was just
Often.
informed by our fire chief that it will be every 2 months.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. For the Sports Complex Planning Committee, I currently have Councillor Montgomery and Councillor Corbeil.
And does that sound good with everyone? Is that, okay, thank you. Oh,
No, that's the one that if Councillor Corville wouldn't mind, I would.
okay. Okay, so then that would be, thank you, Councillor Corbeil, so then that would be Councillor Cox and Councillor Montgomery?
And if Councillor, sorry, through the chair, if Councillor Corbeil, if you would like to take it, if you're more interested, I wouldn't mind giving up my spot, but I'm happy to take it as well, so.
It was one of the platforms. So I know, it would be a good thing if she was on that committee.
But it's not, sorry.
Councillor Cox, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, my understanding is that is not to do with the new ice rinks.
Correct, Your Worship. That committee has not been created yet. It has to come back to council for creation.
Right. Okay,
So are we-
thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Corbeil, did you have any comments on that one then, as far as, okay. So could you just rewind a bit, Ms. Sawatsky, and just give me the names again for that committee, the Sports Complex Planning Committee?
Yes, Your Worship. I have Councillor Montgomery and Councillor Cox.
Okay, thank you.
For Strathmore Library Board, I have Councillor Bauer.
Thank you.
For Marigold Library, Councillor Peterson.
Thank you.
For Canadian Badlands, that is Mayor Fuel.
It's,
Your Worship, I can speak to that committee if
okay,
you wish.
thank you, Ms. Sawatsky.
So the Canadian Badlands Association shareholder representative typically attends the AGM for that association. There's also two subcommittees on that association, which I believe is tourism development. I'm sorry, I can't remember the other one. Is tourism. It also has to do with tourism, obviously. And the mayor or the council member attending those are optional committees. They don't have to sit on those committees. So really the only obligation with this one is to attend the AGM. And in speaking with the representative from Canadian Badlands, it is typically the mayors who sit on this committee.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peterson, did you have any comments for that, or?
The only thing, Your Worship, I think that the reason that I received a call from Canadian Badlands, I haven't followed up with them yet, because they full well know that this is a position for the mayor. I think that they were speaking with regards to the subcommittees,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. So that's something that I would find out then as I attend the Badlands meeting as far as subcommittees, and then we could revisit that with Councillor Peterson?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Peterson.
Okay, moving forward, I have Community Futures Wild Rose, Councillor Cox. The Handy Bus Association, Councillor Montgomery. Chamber of Commerce, Councillor Sobel. Strathmore Overnight Shelter Development Board. I do not have a councillor indicated for that position.
Councillor Peterson, did you want to speak to that?
So Councillor Bauer indicated an interest in sitting on the Strathmore Overnight Shelter Board. And so in conversation, we talked about ongoing process with that, and there's certainly, they'll be thrilled to have Councillor Bauer on their board. However, this board is going through some significant changes and through from a operations to a governance process. They're going into a governance model, and as they approach the opening of the overnight shelter. And so in that process, I've been writing their policies, standards, terms of reference, those things, and that is in the process. So one of the things I'd like to ask your input on from administration, I'd be very, I think everyone would be very happy for Councillor Bauer to sit on this committee. If council has no objection, and Councillor Bauer specifically has no objection, I'd be happy to sit as a member at large, just as a community member, without voting privileges on the board to complete the work, if there is no concern from council and no objections.
Any comments from council? No? I think that sounds like a good solution, and it brings two strong people to a committee like that. Councillor Bauer, you might want to keep in mind or take a look at or consider, you're starting to get pretty loaded down with committees, so we might want to keep an eye on that. Yes, Councillor Peterson.
I believe that Councillor Bauer put her name down for Woodemsa, and
Yes.
I could stay on Woodemsa if she's taking the overnight shelter.
That sounds like a strong idea. I like that. I think that would help you as well. Okay, next one.
Strathmore Wheatland Addictions Team, Councillor Corbeil. Strathmore, Strathmore Youth Club, Councillor Bauer.
Thank you.
Wademza, Councillor Peterson, and Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you.
Wheatland Housing, Councillor Cox, Councillor Peterson. And CRP, Mayor Fuel, and Councillor Sobel.
Okay, thank you. Now, at this time, Ms. Sawatsky, I did have a question come forward again, and I know we had removed it as one of our committees that council would join, but Communities in Bloom had asked if we would discuss or think about the idea of having a council member return to that committee, and that's something we can discuss at a later time or at budget meeting too.
Your Worship, just advice, I would request a written request to council for council
To consider.
membership on that committee, yes.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sawatsky. Councillor Sobel.
Thank you. So just one comment and one question. Of course, we don't have Calgary Regional Partnership. Any of the subcommittees have not yet been named or been requested, so certainly I would be looking forward to once again be on the Transportation Committee if CRP still exists by that time. If I could, Your Worship, through the chair, there was a conversation in one of our last meetings with the fire chief in which he indicated that all of council was a member of a specific committee that you were looking after. Am I incorrect in that, Chief?
So, through Your Worship, through to Councillor Sobel, if we're talking about the advisory committee?
For?
Disaster services?
Yes, sir. That's exactly right.
Yeah, so, point of public record, the disaster aid committee is actually the emergency advisory committee, and it could be one or all of council. In
Okay.
this particular case, there's two that have been named,
Right.
two councillors.
Okay.
So I hope that clarifies.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Sawatsky, once we've gone through everything, are we looking for a motion then to accept these as committee appointments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Peterson.
Your Worship, I would move that council appoint said councillors to the committee for a one-year term ending October 31st, 2018.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. And councillors, you've all heard the motion. All in favor of that motion? And the motion is passed. Which brings us to number 8.1, reports from councillors from the committees on which they sit, but we've just joined those committees, so that's not going to happen. Item 9, items directly related to council. And that brings us to item 10, bylaws, which brings us back to item 10.1, bylaw number 17-12, the land use bylaw amendment bylaw. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sobel.
I would move second reading on bylaw number 17-12.
Thank you, and you've heard the motion. Is there any discussion on the second reading? None seen. All in favor? And we're looking for a motion for third reading. Councillor Cox.
Your worship, I move that we hear the third reading of bylaw number 17-12.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. You've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion is passed. And this brings us to item 11.1, urgent business, which deals with the letter Councillor Peterson had brought up with Ms. Sawatsky, I think. Or is it just Councillor Peterson?
Do you have the letter? So.
I know I could not get it to
I can speak
open.
to it. So, the Strathmore Overnight Shelter is applying for the Alberta Rural Development Grant that closes November 6th. So that's why the urgency to bring it to this meeting. The motion, the letter states that the town of Strathmore is advocating for the Strathmore Overnight Shelter to proceed with that grant in the hopes that they would be successful. It also quotes the motion from December of 2016, where Councillor Sobel moved that the town support the overnight shelter with a $40,000 stipend to help them with the development of this endeavor. And I believe a subsequent motion that a matching grant of an additional $20,000 would be there. So it does quote the motion and states and affirms the support. I'm asking the council, actually, if you would entertain a motion, Your Worship, I would move that council request Mayor Fuel sign the letter on behalf of Mayor and Council in support of the Strathmore Overnight Shelter bid for the urban development grant for the overnight shelter.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. You've all heard the motion. Are there any comments or questions? Councillor Sobel?
Thank you. I would love to have the letter here, but I just, Councillor Peterson, I just want to confirm, you've seen the letter and that you're asking Councillor Fuel to sign, or Mayor Fuel, pardon me.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel, through the chair.
Yes.
I wrote the letter, and so, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson, for clearing up that. Councillor Cox?
Sorry, through your worship. Sorry. I just need clarification. We're only moving to approve the letter being signed, not for the $20,000.
I believe that's correct. It's just to request a letter of support be sent in support of their application for a grant. Is that correct?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Yes, that would actually clarify things, Councillor Peterson.
The letter is dated November the 1st, 2017. To whom it may concern, Strathmore Town Council is supportive of the Strathmore Overnight Shelter. Council solidified their support for this initiative through the following motion declared December 16th, 2015. The Strathmore Overnight Shelter has been diligent in regular reporting their financial status to Council. Strathmore Town Council, at the request of the Strathmore Overnight Shelter Board, appointed Council Member Denise Peterson to the SOS Board February 2017. As Mayor for the town of Strathmore, I have publicly declared my support of this undertaking and have congratulated Harvest Healing Church for their considerable support for the project. Our community stands to benefit from this initiative, and on behalf of Council, I offer this letter as proof of our support. Yours truly, Mayor Patrick Fuel.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. My only comment would be, I wonder if we should add Councillor Bauer's name as being the new member on the SOS, or the Strathmore Overnight Shelter.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. So if we can just have that added to the letter, that would be great. So, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, you've heard the motion. Councillor Peterson, did you need to say anything else, or you're good? Okay. You've all heard the motion regarding the letter of support. All in favor? And the motion is passed. Thank you. Which brings us to questions between councillors and councillor statements. Do I need to go one by one? Councillor Sobel? No, I don't think I have to go one by one, do I? No, thank you. Which brings us to item number 13, administrative inquiries. I just have one inquiry for administration, And it's just, again, I did have some people ask me during the campaign, and that is a question concerning the Strathaven Mall as far as the future development plans, when things might be started, as well as the site appearance in the back on the west side of the building, and just if we can find out some information possibly. Oh, we have someone coming forward. Ryan, thank you.
Your worship, no need to temporize there. The building permit application for that came in today.
Perfect,
So
thank you.
It will be a good-sized building permit to go through, but yeah. Yeah, the architect dropped all that off this morning.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Peterson, administrative inquiry?
Yes, I received a call today from Mr. Joe Bratton, and the questions revolved around concerns regarding the water metering at Lambert Village. I'd just like permission to council to be able to go to our CAO to answer the questions, and I've been asked to attend a meeting at Lambert Village in the near future to address the issues, but and Mr. Bratton has given me a list of questions to bring forward. If that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is with regards to any committees that a councillor might sit on that do not have insurance for the councillors. I believe there's one committee that we spoke about. How would we go about getting it so that we could be covered? Would we have to make a bylaw?
Mr. Thackeray?
If I may, I think we might be able to answer your question after, because you are covered and indemnified as a member of council.
I was under the impression that there might be one councillor that there was the Strathmore overnight shelter that might not have insurance for their councillors.
Councillor Peterson, would you like to speak to that?
We can look into it, but I
Okay.
believe we can answer your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other inquiry? Oh, Councillor Bauer.
I do have a business owner who came to me after the sidewalks were developed. It was the owner of the Bank Athletic Club, and she has let me know that since having the budget approved for her sidewalk removal, the sidewalks have become bigger because of the downtown development, extending the sidewalks, and her budget is now an additional $300 for the season. So I'll be coming to our CAO in the next week, hopefully, at our coffee, and just talking about whether or not you would consider town snow removal for the corner lots or for any of the downtown development projects that has been approved. Because it impacts, I believe it's about 8 different businesses or associations.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Any other administrative inquiries? Nope, and I believe we're not going in camera for any items. So that brings us to a motion for adjournment. Councillor Corbeil.
I move we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. All in favor?